person to walk on the planet Mars. I really believed that I could do this, and that it was going to be me. Now, my crazy ambition turned out to be this great gift that I gave for myself. It set me down a path that ended just this year without me ever making it to Mars. But I did get kind of close. In fact, I made it into space 4 times. Now, if you think that's impressive, getting into space 4 times, just think of how impressed the aliens were when I told them that I'd been to the planet Earth 5 times. Now, to get there, I decided that I was going to be a naval aviator, and then a naval test pilot, and then an astronaut. I started flight school in the year 1986. Now, this was the year that the movie Top Gun came out, which is before a lot of you guys were born, but you've probably seen the movie. Now, as I drove off to Pensacola to start flight school, I was on top of the world. It's kind of embarrassing for me to say this, but I even had that cheesy music from the soundtrack playing on my stereo as I drove through the gate of Naval Air Station Pensacola. Then I quickly found out that I was not Maverick. In fact, I was not a particularly good pilot. And after months of training, I still could barely land an airplane on the runway. And I would soon have to go out to an aircraft carrier for the first time. Now, when the Navy sends you to land on a ship for the first time, there isn't anybody crazy enough to go with you. It is just you by yourself with whatever skills you've been able to accumulate from a lot of practice. And I very vividly remember seeing this tiny deck bobbing in what seemed like the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It's like the size of a postage stamp. Now, scary doesn't come close to describing this experience. So I head out to the ship, I see it out there in the distance, I fly overhead, I do my 2 touch-and-go landings, and then I do these 4 arrested landings. The arrested landings are when you put the tail hook down and you catch a wire that's strung across the back of the ship. Then you taxi up to the bow, you get shot off on the catapult, shot off back into the air, and you go around for another try. Now, later that night, I was debriefed by the instructor pilot that had been watching from the back of the ship. And you know what the first thing he said to me? He said, "Are you sure this career is for you?" I was still a really horrible pilot. I barely passed. You know, in fact, I think that Tom Cruise would have been better. Now, I don't mean the character from the movie. I mean the actor, Tom Cruise. I'm sure he would have been better at that than I was. Now, my point in telling you all this is that the other student pilots that did well that day did not go on to become test pilots or astronauts. How good you are at the beginning of anything you try is not a good indicator of how good you can become. I'm a prime example. You know, I'm a prime example of somebody who was able to overcome a lack of aptitude with practice, persistence, and the drive to never, ever give up. So as all of you embark on the next phase of your own lives and start new careers and new endeavors, please remember that I started out as a lousy pilot and ended up commanding a rocket ship into space. I'm here to encourage all of you today to set some crazy and ambitious goals for yourselves. Like me, you may not achieve your goals. You see, I never made it to Mars, but the journey was certainly worth the effort. I promise you, it will be worth it for all of you as well. You know, I think we can sum up our lives as a set of challenges to overcome and obstacles to climb over. One of my earliest professional challenges began when a man named Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in the summer of 1990. By the fall that year, I was in the Persian Gulf aboard the aircraft carrier, the USS Midway. And in January 1991, I was just 25 years old and headed off into my first combat mission on the opening night of Operation Desert Storm. I learned a valuable lesson about communication on that night of my first combat mission. As my bombardier navigator and I made it to the flight deck that evening, there was an incredible amount of activity. Dozens of bombs and missiles were being loaded onto the jets, mine included. Paul Fujimura, my bombardier navigator, and I would carry 12 1,000-pound bombs to a target over southern Iraq. We launched into the darkness at night. It was pitch black. We headed off to this airborne tanker to get a full load of gas, and then we headed north into Iraq. Now, by this point, the entire country seemed to be on fire. Before we even reached our target, we encountered two Russian surface-to-air missiles, one of which detonated really close to our airplane. AAA, anti-aircraft artillery, was all around us. Now, Winston Churchill, who I think we all know, said about his experience in World War I, this is a quote, "There is nothing more exciting than being shot at and missed." Well, speaking from my experience, it is exciting, but until you know you're not going to be killed, it's not any fun. You know, on our way out of Iraq that night, I decided that I wanted to avoid this area that had these Russian surface-to-air missiles on my way back to the ship. I really did not want to deal with this again. So I decided to head directly east. I think this way's east, right? Well, you know what's east of Iraq? Yes, Iran. So despite the repeated protests from my navigator about an international incident, I go about 100 miles into Iran before hanging this right-hand turn and heading towards the Gulf. As I approach the water, I can hear our air wing vectoring our own fighters towards an enemy airplane. Now, I thought to myself that this poor Iraqi pilot didn't stand a chance against our U.S. Navy fighters. And as I listened on the radio, I heard the altitude and airspeed of the enemy fighter, and I recall looking at my own instruments and thinking to myself, huh, that's our airspeed and altitude exactly. Then the light bulb came on. It was me that they were about to shoot down. My own guys. I had just survived these 2 Russian surface-to-air missiles, but I did not stand a chance against the U.S. Navy fighter. I immediately yelled into the radio, "Do not shoot down the moron in Iranian airspace." Because it was me. So it was a quiet trip back to the ship that night. Paul never gave me an "I told you so." But I did get to think about what happened. You know, I was almost killed because I did not properly communicate with the folks that I worked with. I didn't tell them what I was doing. I learned a very good lesson at a young age that communication is vital in any organization. There is never an excuse for not having timely and accurate communication with the people you work with. All of you will likely work on some sort of team or within a group or organization someday. It's critical that you communicate effectively with that team. I learned that lesson early, and it nearly cost me my life. As you all embark on the next phase of your own lives, you'll have to make many decisions. There may be decisions that affect the success of the company that you work for, or maybe decisions that you'll have to make regarding the health care of a spouse, child, or some other family member. Now, these can be some of the most critical decisions that we make in our lives. So I want to give you a little bit of advice about decision making that I've learned from my many years in the Navy and at NASA. Now, NASA has had a couple of accidents with the space shuttle. The launch of Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986 and Columbia in 2003 resulted in the deaths of 14 crew members. Now, the Columbia accident really hit close to home to me because 3 of the astronauts on board were my astronaut classmates, and I was the unfortunate individual that had to retrieve their bodies from the woods in a dirt road in East Texas. You know, both of these accidents were at least partly attributable to poor decision-making. After my wife, Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords, was injured last year in a would-be assassination attempt, I vowed that I would do everything I could to make sure we didn't make bad decisions with regards to her care. You know, in the room that we now use at NASA to hold meetings when we have a crew in space, there is a saying on the wall. In very big and bold letters, it says, and I quote, "None of us is as dumb as all of us." This could be a little confusing, so I'll say it again. None of us is as dumb as all of us. What this means is that teams of people can sometimes make a decision that no single individual on that team would make. That groupthink can set in, and a team can march off in the wrong direction and make a really bad decision. So please think about this as you work together to solve the world's problems. I often do, and it has served me very well. Now, over the past year or two, I've learned a thing or two about the power of the human spirit. It's been an incredible experience for me to watch my wife, Gabby, first fight so hard to survive, and then fight so hard to come back. She's been this incredible inspiration to me. Each day as she heads off to therapy, she'll tell me, fight, fight, fight. She reminds me each and every day to deny the acceptance of failure. You know, the fact that all of you are here today says a lot about your own drive and determination. But life often presents us with some incredible and unexpected challenges. Some of you will face those challenges sooner rather than later. When you do, please think of my wife, Gabby, and think of those words. Deny the acceptance of failure. Now, you have all invested a tremendous effort in getting this education. It was certainly a smart investment, but it's also one that comes with a lot of great expectations. Not only your own expectations, but possibly the expectations of your professors, parents, and friends. They have their own expectations of what you should do with your education. Now, I encourage you to listen to the people that you trust the most, but also understand that this is your life to live. Things can change for any of us in an instant. Gabby and I certainly understand that as well as anybody. So it is most important to find the calling that is best suited to you. Find the thing or the job or the experience that makes you happy. You can't live anybody's life but your own. That's the deal that life offers us. You know, my wife's a big fan of the poet Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of our country's greatest poets. And he once said, "Do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail." I think that's sound advice for all of us.